Hello and welcome back to Sorry What, my friends. My name is Jason and I hope you're ready for today's story. Now, let's get to it, shall we? Winter 2021 came in soft in Buffalo, with only a few inches of snow in November and December. Seduced by the mild weather, my neighbors and I speculated that perhaps the scourge of global warming had finally defeated the brutal lake effect that shredded us every year. It was wishful thinking. In January, we got hit with sub-zero temperatures and over 50 inches of snow and sleet. Overwhelming evidence that, at least for the time being, Jack Frost was still kicking the sheet out of Al Gore's inconvenient truth. Buffalo's good about getting snow off the streets, but driving was still harrowing for much of that winter. As the owner of my own company, Jim Carlisle Marketing, I had it easier than most. I was usually able to work from home, a privilege that I extended to my employees when the weather got particularly rough. Our specialty was producing engaging, somewhat truly paid articles that depicted our clients in a new and surprising way. For example, one of our customers was Timber Valley, a local retirement village. Rather than going the usual route of focusing on facilities such as pools, art rooms, and semi-independent apartments, we commissioned articles on the link between exercise and delayed aging, and illustrated them with pics of Timber Valley residents on zip lines, jet skis, mountain hikes, and other strenuous activities. Sales increased 5% in the first quarter after we started running our stories. In the second quarter, we started giving discounts for extended family members to come along, and sales went up 9%. Later, when we pushed the Will Retirement and TIMBERVALLEY for life hashtags, they went up 13%. They were still rising. My work isn't rocket science, but I think it's fair to say that it takes a particular kind of weird brain to position death's waiting room as life's next adventure for the Woodstock generation. Thankfully, I have that kind of brain, and I seem to attract similarly bizarre individuals. Together, we've turned the daydreaming that nearly got me kicked out of 6th grade into a career that had recently crossed the line into six figures. This isn't to say that I spend all my time with my head in the clouds. My work hinges on picking out little details and building stories around them, so I like to think I'm pretty aware of what's going on, at least until I choose to let my mind wander. Which, admittedly, I'm prone to do. My wife Linda, on the other hand, always had her feet firmly planted on the ground. As the office manager for Sprague, Sprout and Screwy, one of Buffalo's biggest law firms, her work involved corralling a herd of overambitious, oversexed lawyers into something resembling a functional company. I was a little nervous when she started working there. Legal ethics is more of a punchline than a strict guideline, and I'd heard way too many stories about workplace shenanigans. But her first office Christmas party put my mind at ease. It soon became clear that, while Linda was basically the den mother for an office full of coked-up bonobos on Spanish Fly, she regarded her charges with a sort of disgusted bemusement. Linda had to be in her office from 9 to 5, regardless of the weather, so I was the one who saw our kids, Emma, age 8 and Tommy, age 6, off to school in the mornings and picked them up in the afternoons. By default, that meant that I was also the go-to parent. The one who handled doctors' visits and teacher conferences, organized cupcakes on birthdays, and ferried the kids to playdates. I treasure those moments. My father had missed much of my childhood, and I felt lucky that I got to see my kids grow up. It wasn't always sunshine and rainbows. That winter, school closings meant that I spent a lot of time as a full-time stay-at-home dad, tormented by the constant muffled sound of Frozen coming out of the living room, and repeatedly forced to halt my work to serve snacks, mediate conflicts, and tell stories to a pair of understimulated munchkins. Despite my best efforts to get the kids out in the yard, the glacial temperatures and towering snow drifts usually kept us huddled inside. By the time Valentine's Day was on the horizon, I was getting a new understanding of why the Donner Party ended up the way it did. I think maybe it wasn't just about the food. Linda had it somewhat easier because of her job. At least she got to spend the day talking to adults, but I could tell the walls were closing in on her, too. In a burst of optimism and desperation, she and the other wives in our circle planned a big Valentine's Day outing. The women went all out. They bought new dresses, lined up childcare, made reservations at a top-notch restaurant, and found a club that was known for its good cocktails and great dancing. It was going to be a grand celebration of getting over the hump of a tough winter, and a little boost to get us through to spring. Linda's roll of the dice came up snake eyes when another storm hit, dumping a ton of snow and shutting down half the city. The club closed, the restaurant cancelled our reservation, and the state police advised everyone to restrict travel to essential business. Even if they hadn't all weighed in, I'm pretty sure Linda would have wanted to cancel. Temperatures were well below zero, and her new dress and shoes would have looked weird over thermal underwear and wool knee socks. And so I found myself on the morning of February 14th shoveling a foot and a half of snow off the driveway. It wasn't like we were going to go out anytime soon, but with 2 kids in the house, you really can't afford to be snowbound. Besides, it gave me a brief respite from listening to Frozen. It's fair to say that, by mid-February, even my daydreams were a little grim. Tapping my snow shovel on Linda's bumper, I cast a baleful glare at the sticker she had put there. A woman needs a man like a fish needs a bicycle. Ducking Gloria Steinem. When Linda put the sticker on her car, I had a couple of dozen printed up that said, "A man needs a woman like a lobster needs a chainsaw," and slapped one on the rear end of my Ford Expedition. I think she got the point, but missed the irony. Truth be told, Linda's kind of irony resistant. I mean, she's smart, loving, and has a great sense of humor, but she sometimes gets caught up in the catchphrases. The future is female. My body, my choice. Carry yourself with the confidence of a mediocre white man. A woman's place is in the House and the Senate. It's not that I completely disagree with her slogans, although the future is female really pisses me off. I'm all for bodily autonomy, equal pay, equal political power, and equal opportunity. I'm proud of my mom and grandma, both of whom went to college, built great careers, and struggled with prejudice in the workplace. And, as the father of a little girl, I challenge anyone who tries to deny Emma any opportunities. At all. Seriously, if the kid wants to be a welder, I'm buying her an acetylene torch. But the us versus them soundbites tended to creep into Linda's way of looking at the world. Sometimes, instead of seeing herself as an advocate for equality, she acted more like a suicide bomber on the front lines of a battle between the sexes, desperate to show that she was a completely independent woman who wouldn't bend to the needs of any man. As the nearest man at hand, and a guy who sometimes had to ask her to bend to the needs of our family, it sometimes felt like I was being forced into the role of opponent, not ally. Plus the joking not joking I hate boys crap got on my nerves. That kind of fake feminism started going out of style close to a decade ago, but don't tell Linda that. Seriously, don't tell her. I've tried, and it's no fun being in the position of mansplaining feminism to your wife, unless you've got a really comfortable couch. Thankfully, those sorts of arguments were rare. Most of the time, we were lovers and confidants, die-hard cheerleaders and best friends. We shared household responsibilities pretty equitably. I was a better cook, she was better with laundry, we both hated vacuuming, and we kept the house running smoothly. Given my flexible schedule, I usually handled childcare, which I enjoyed. At least when we weren't snowbound. Speaking of which, I was also in charge of snow shoveling. And, after the driveway was cleared and I'd warmed up a bit, we were both going to spend an hour or 2 rolling around the yard with the kids. Valentine's Day downtown would have been great, but as I thought about making igloos and snowmen with Linda, Emma and Tommy, I had to admit that my life couldn't be much better. Linda was nothing if not determined, so I wasn't surprised when she, Dee, Jane, and the other wives rescheduled our Valentine's Day soiree, rebranded as Goodbye, February, We Won't Miss You, for the last day of the month. The new, improved plan was even more ambitious. In addition to dinner and dancing, we were also going to spend the night at a nearby hotel. Linda figured that, even if the restaurant and club ended up closing, we would benefit from a night by ourselves in a strange bed, doing things that would scare the children. I was totally on board. By the end of February, I would have happily given a toe for the chance to gorge on overpriced beers and honey-roasted cashews from the wet bar in a room where Frozen wasn't playing. It says a lot when a hotel room picnic starts to feel like a combination of Nirvana, Shangri-La, and the last 5 minutes of 2001: A Space Odyssey. This time around, the weather cooperated, giving us a couple of days when the temperature rose to a comparatively balmy 30 degrees Fahrenheit. Linda was able to shed the long underwear, and her sleeveless blue dress was a vivid reminder that, under all the winter layers, my wife was a goddess. I wasn't doing too bad myself. Well, I had only been to the gym a couple of times since early January. Shoveling snow is a great workout, and I looked pretty sharp in my best suit. The night started out perfectly. We made it most of the way through another winter, the kids were doing fine, our jobs were great, and we were in love. It's a cliché, but shared struggle really does bring a couple together, and we were never closer than when we walked into Morrison's, the club where we were going to spend the night dancing before retiring to our hotel room for even more delightful aerobic exercise. The place was jumping. Apparently, we weren't the only people who were desperate to get out of the house. It was a younger crowd, and I recognized a few players from the Bills, our hometown football team. On the dance floor, we were in fluid motion. Poetry. Fred Astaire and Ginger Rogers, minus the 2P. Silver Linings Playbook, minus the crazy. I spin her out and her fingertips slide to the end of my arm. Her eyes are on mine, aflame with desire. She caresses my hand as I circle my arm around her waist. Our feet in perfect synchrony. Come here often. She breathes, her eyes glittering with desire. Only with the right partner, I whisper into her ear. She shivers. Am I the right partner? I hold her with my arms. My eyes. The only partner. Her pelvis presses into me. Every nerve on my body and hers is raw and hungry, desperately absorbing the touch of our skin through our clothes. Her breath hitches and I can smell her, beneath the perfume, beneath the familiar bouquet of her shampoo, the musky, needy scent of my wife, my partner. I feel spring welling up inside me, coming alive after months of winter slumber. It's nice when my daydreams match reality. When the music ended, we drifted back to the table. My God, Jane exclaimed, fanning herself. I think you melted the dance floor. Linda preened as she found her way to her seat. No kidding, Dee said, her face flushed. Where did you learn to do that? We took dance lessons when we were in college, I said. It was an elective and the professor partnered us up. It kind of became our thing. One of our things, Linda corrected me. The table broke into laughter. I've got the next one, Linda, Dee's husband Dave said. Dee was smiling, so I figured she had her own agenda, but Linda quickly shot Dave down. Nope, tonight all my dances are for my husband. Then she looked at me and her eyes softened. I'm thinking just one or two more, she whispered, and I nodded my head. It was a perfect night. And then Marc LaValliere showed up. When Linda dropped my hand and scurried to the dance floor with LaValliere, it took me a moment to realize what was going on. At first I thought it was a joke, that she'd turn around, come back and say, just kidding, babe, let's get out of here. But then she didn't. As I watched them moving around the floor, it began to sink in that my wife had ditched me without a word. That, in the blink of an eye, I'd plummeted from the marital equivalent of an Aruba beach to an Alaska snowbank. I started to get up, but Jane put her hand on my shoulder. Let her have this, she said. It's Marc LaValliere, the Bill's new tight end. I brushed her hand off, but she clutched my arm. Don't, she hissed. Her fingers tightened. It's just a dance, Jim. Let her have it. I looked at Linda on the dance floor and felt numb. Isolated. Looking at the smug smiles of the women at the table and the embarrassed expressions of their husbands, I felt exposed. Humiliated. I had two choices. Do as I'm told and sit down like a good little boy, or make a scene, and make my humiliation even more public. More shameful. Duck you, Linda. I imagined what I would do if this was a movie, if I was some sort of international assassin, or a former Navy SEAL with a dark past. Do you mind if I cut in? I asked as I stepped up to the couple. Find your own, LaValliere sneered. This one's taken. Yes, she is, I growled. She's my wife. Jim, please, Linda said, her eyes locked on LaValliere's. Just one song. I don't think so, I said. LaValliere barely turned from her as he backhanded me. Ibrahim Mazouz and Dan Smith, the Bills' offensive guard and wide receiver, stepped out of the crowd, but LaValliere held a hand in the air, and they stopped. I've got this, he said. Hubby's going to be a good boy and let us finish our dance. I froze. The band switched to a haunting instrumental. Conversation stopped and the room went silent. A flock of doves took flight behind me. I wiped my lips. Blood. Smiling, I stood up straight, dropped my hands to my sides, and raised my eyes to LaValliere's. He was sneering. I don't think so, I growled. I'm not losing to a tight end who chokes on the big ones. I whipped out my twin Springfield Armory M1911A1V12s. The guns exploded, taking out Mazouz and Smith. I dove behind one of the tables as LaValliere pulled out his own hardware, a Beretta 92 FS Inox, and shoved Linda into the crowd. He fired twice. Dee's head blew apart, and Jane coughed blood as she took one in the neck. Good riddance. I got up from my hiding place, guns at the ready. No. No. This wasn't some old John Woo movie, and it wasn't a nightmare. My wife was actually dancing with that asket in a crowded club, leaving me holding my deck while she gazed up at him like he hung the moon and stars. I didn't have guns, didn't have a haunting soundtrack, didn't have an offensive line by my side. Yeah, I was in good shape, but I had no illusions about taking on a handful of football players. And, from the looks of things, my wife. And that's the kicker, isn't it? Because LaValliere hadn't dragged her up there with him. She'd gone quite willingly. She dropped me like a hot potato, without a single glance back. Even now, her eyes were on him. As far as she was concerned, I wasn't even in the room. Through my confusion and rage, the questions hit me. What kind of woman does that? What kind of human? I won't pretend I wasn't blindingly furious at LaValliere, but was it really his fault? Sure, he was a scumbucket who got off on dancing with married women and humiliating their husbands, but I could hardly blame him for being attracted to Linda. Besides, it wasn't like he had made me any promises or owed me any loyalty. But Linda, she owed me a lot. She owed me better than this. Watching her on the dance floor, I saw something clearly. So clearly that I wondered why I hadn't seen it before, in all the other arguments and little tiffs that had marked our time together. LaValliere wasn't my opponent. Linda was. She's made herself my opponent. Even if I had the flashy guns, the haunting soundtrack, and the offensive line at my back, or, for that matter, if I grabbed one of the knives off the table and jammed it between LaValliere's ribs, I still wouldn't win. Linda had chosen to do this, chosen to put a few dances with this manicured sheepbag ahead of our marriage. She decided that she was the independent, strong woman who needed a man, her man, like a fish needed a bicycle. She had created this problem. I couldn't fix it for her. She had to pick her marriage and me over whatever this was. She had to bend. If not, we were going to break. So I sat and fumed and thought dark thoughts through 2 songs, while the rest of the table made lame attempts at conversation. I saw the nod LaValliere gave to the bandleader and the nod he got in return. Songs 3, 4 and 5 were all slow dances, and they all played back to back. LaValliere's dances with Linda were a parody of ours. Instead of our graceful seduction and flowing motion, his was a dance of dominance, of a man seizing control of a woman as he stomped around the dance floor. Linda didn't seem to mind. Apparently, a little toxic masculinity was fine, as long as she got to be the belle of the ball. Finally, LaValliere nodded at the bandleader and the music segued into something more up-tempo. He and Linda stepped out of their embrace, and he leaned down and whispered in her ear. Her smile widened. With one last squeeze of her forearm, he let her go and strutted back to his table. She turned to me and, for the first time since the ass call had taken her onto the dance floor, I saw her eyes. Saw their glittering brightness dim at the sight of me. Saw her beaming smile fade into something cold and stiff and fake. Duck. Linda could be a decent actor when she tried, and she was trying hard as she walked back to me. But she couldn't hide the look on her face, the one that showed that I was now downgraded from the love of her life to a problem that needed to be dealt with. She was most of the way to her seat when Dee shot up, her own glee giving a fresh boost against the dull dread in my wife's eyes. Linda, you were amazing, Dee exclaimed. My wife's frozen smile widened and became genuine. My heart fell even further. As I stood up, the other couples in our group were looking at everything but me. Dee leaned down and whispered something in Dave's ear. His face flushed and he put his hand to his mouth. What was he hiding? A grimace. A chuckle. Linda, I have to go to the bathroom, Dee said, her voice unnaturally bright. Come with me. Linda glanced at me again and I saw her eyes sparkle. And I knew. Duck. Her body. Her choice. Duck. And then my wife was gone with her best friend, and I was standing by myself, feeling like the world's biggest doofus. My skin was prickly, like I was naked, and I felt the eyes of the entire room on me. Saw the smirks barely covered by their hands. I coughed. Excuse me, I muttered. I need a drink. Jim, Dave started. Don't, I growled. Don't say a ducking word. His eyes widened and he went back to looking at the glasses on the table. I don't know what he saw on my face, but I felt a ripple of grim satisfaction. Our friends were silent as I walked away. It was a busy night, and the bartenders were rushing to fill everyone's orders, but it didn't matter. The last thing I needed now was another overpriced gin and tonic. From the bar, I had a clear line of sight to the back of the club. Mizuz and Smith turned down the hallway and were walking past the bathrooms. Duck, I muttered as Dee stepped out. She was scanning the crowd, looking for me. I wasn't hard to find. There weren't too many guys shoving their way through the dance floor on a beeline to the back hallway. But by the time Dee saw me, I was practically on top of her. Jim, she exclaimed. Not now, you sheethead. I shoved her out of my way. At the end of the hall, the exit door was already open, and I could see Linda rushing into the parking lot, LaValliere close behind her. The 2 linemen were blocking the door. I ran at them. I might not have been a John Woo character, but I was pissed. Hey, Linda. I barked as I slammed my way past Mizuz and Smith. Hey, duckface, I yelled. LaValliere must have recognized the name because he was turning back to me, and already had his hands up when I barreled into him. He gave me a hard push, and I had a split second to see his smirk before I bashed him across the face. I felt something in my hand snap as I lined up for another hit, but suddenly my arms were pinned behind my back. Mothodiker knocked me over. Someone said behind me. Boy's got some talent. LaValliere rubbed his jaw. Not bad, he smirked at me. Not good enough, but not bad. He turned to Linda. Go to the car. The white Escalade. Mark. It's okay, sexy. I'll be there in a second. I looked up at her. Saw her white eyes. Then I saw the calculation in them. Her body, her choice. She turned away and started walking to the car. Linda. I yelled. She slowed down. Last chance, Linda, I said. She started walking faster. Go home, Jim, she called over her shoulder. Her body. Her. Duck you, Linda. She was almost to the car when LaValliere's fist slammed into my face. It hurt. It hurt a lot. But it was nothing compared to the way I felt when I saw her running away. He punched me again and a wave of agony rolled through my head, drowning everything in his path. I was dizzy and my head was too heavy to lift. 3-on-1, I muttered as I tried to focus my eyes. Big ducking football kitty. If it makes you feel better, it'll be 1-on-1 in my bedroom tonight, LaValliere sneered. He hit me again, on my side this time, and I couldn't breathe. He laughed. Don't worry, I'll bring her back tomorrow. Don't bother, I gasped. A woman who'd duck a piece of sheet like you isn't worth much. That earned me another hit in the ribs. I tried to lift my head, but it was still too heavy. Don't kill him, LaValliere called from the distance. Then I was getting dragged back into the club. My head lolled back and I saw Linda and LaValliere in the car, their lips already locked. I think her head was on its way to his lap when Morrison's back door closed and I was plunged into darkness. When I woke up, I was alone. I opened my eyes. Darkness. Blurry red light. Stale beer smell. The back hallway at Morrison's. I closed my eyes. Opened them. Under the exit sign there was a blinking red light. I watched it for a minute while my eyes focused and I tried to figure out what to do next. Behind me, I could hear the muffled sound of the band. I tried to sit up, but my stomach cramped and I was barely able to roll over before I puked. That set off a round of coughing, and it felt like my lungs were trying to work their way out through my mouth. I tried to breathe deeply, but it hurt too much, so I held my breath as I pushed myself up to my knees, then to my feet. I reached out to the wall to steady myself. Blinking red light. I felt drunk. Drunk and hurting everywhere. I was swaying, but my feet stayed under me. Good. Thoughts came slowly. I decided that the first thing I needed to do was get the duck out of the hallway before LaValliere's thugs came back or someone else took a crack at me. I felt my cheek and my hand came back sticky. Might be a good idea to visit the bathroom. Clean up and get out with as little fuss as possible. Don't make myself a target. Reevaluate. Plan. Get beyond the swirl of white. Did she? How could she? My body, my that was filling my head. In the bathroom, I clutched the sides of the sink as I stared in the mirror. I had a gash from my cheekbone to my left temple. Duck, was he wearing a ring? My left eye was already starting to swell shut. A bruise was coming up on my cheek, and my lips were bloody. Thankfully, I didn't seem to have any puke on me. I cleaned up as well as I could with paper towels and water, while I reviewed my next steps. Get out quietly. Call an Uber. Get to the hospital. It was a plan. The club's dance floor was packed, and I felt like a sack of broken china, so I threaded my way around the wall toward the front door. When I got close to her table, Jane saw me. Jim. She shrieked. Suddenly, all eyes were on me. Duck, Jim, are you okay? Dave asked. No, Dave. I coughed into my hand. I'm not okay. Not even a little bit. We thought you left, Phil said. What happened? What the duck do you care? I wheezed. None of you bothered to check. Dee was the only one not staring at me. You knew, didn't you? I whispered. You helped her sneak out. Left me bleeding on the floor. You filthy ducking count. I usually don't use language like that, and the table went silent. Jane's jaw was hanging open, and Barb looked like someone had slapped her. Dee's head snapped up, her eyes blazing. Hey, Dave exclaimed after a minute. That's my wife. Don't tell me your problems, Dave, I chuckled dryly. I've got enough of my own. I looked down at the fury on Dee's face. She's offended. How precious. I couldn't help it. I burst out laughing. It hurt like hell, but I couldn't stop. I started coughing and blood spattered Dee's face. She screamed. I felt a spark of glee. I spat in her face. There was a lot of blood. What the duck? Jane yelled, her chair falling over as she jumped back from the table. You don't know where I've been, Dee. I gave a crazy laugh, tasted the coppery flavor in my mouth. You don't know where I've been. I was swaying, and my legs felt rubbery. Enough fun, and more than enough Fight Club quotes. I left my former friends freaking out as they tried to clean my blood off Dee. The doorman was yet another Hulk. Well, if it isn't the big man, he chuckled. He gave me a little love tap in the ribs, and I felt something shift. You have a good night, Mike Tyson. And then I was on the sidewalk. The air was freezing, and my chest felt tighter. My heart was pounding. Duck Uber, I need an ambulance. I dialed 911. 911, the voice said through my phone. What's your emergency? I've been beaten up, I wheezed. I'm at Morrison's, near the waterfront. Sir, the voice said. Sir. I tried to answer. The sidewalk was cold, but so very comfortable. When I woke up, my throat was killing me, but at least I could breathe. Antiseptic smell. Beeping sounds. A hospital. Thank God. I opened my eyes. Big window looking out into a nurse's station. My right hand was bandaged and got all tangled up with the IV tube when I pressed the call button on the bed rail. A moment later, a nurse was there. "Don't try to talk," she said. "I'll get you some ice chips." She was back a moment later. "The doctor will be here soon," she said as she tucked a cup of ice into the crook of my arm and untangled the IV. "Phone," I croaked. "Please." She pulled a clear plastic bag off the side table and gently laid it beside me. "Here are your personal belongings. I'm not sure where your clothes are." She gave a gentle laugh. "Then again, it doesn't look like you're going anywhere for a while." "What day is it?" It hurt to talk, but the melting ice helped. I found my phone in the bag. 27%. A few texts. Nothing from Linda. "It's 4:30 Saturday afternoon." She picked up the chart from the end of my bed. "You're a Buffalo general. You've been under sedation since they brought you in last night." My wife, I began. "We tried to contact her, but she hasn't answered." "Don't," I croaked. The nurse gave me a surprised look. "Don't want to see her." I scrabbled in the cup and grabbed another ice chip. "It's hospital policy to contact the next of kin, Mr. Carlyle." "I'll call parents." I swallowed. "Keep my wife away." She blushed. "Yes, sir," she said. "Also, the police asked about you." I gave her a questioning look. "It's standard policy to call them in when someone comes in looking like you did." "Can't talk to them now." I closed my eyes against the pain. "Later." "Okay," she said softly. "Is there anything else I can get you?" "A phone charger." I swallowed. "USB-C, please." "I'll see what we can dig up. If you need anything, hit the button." She smiled at me as she left. I wondered if I was going to be the latest piece of juicy gossip on the ward. I texted my parents and told them the bare bones of the story, then sent them Mrs. Porter's phone number and asked them to check on the kids. They told me they'd be by to visit, but they lived in Leroy, and I figured it would be a couple of hours. They texted a few minutes later to tell me that Linda had picked up Emma and Tommy earlier that afternoon. Apparently, Mrs. Porter was pissed that we'd left the kids there until 3. Interesting. My next message was to my friend Bailey. Well, he's sort of a friend, mostly my lawyer. We'd known each other since college, and now he represented my business. It's weird to have a guy you used to do beer bongs with handling your contracts, but he'd never left me hanging out to dry. I was realizing how important and rare that is. "Bailey, I need your help," I texted. "In the hospital. Buffalo General. Need to see you as soon as possible." It only took a moment. "I'm with the kids, but I'll be there tonight. No need to leave the family hanging. Tomorrow works. I'm at the in-laws, dude. The kids are watching Frozen. You're doing me a favor." Maybe I need to think about upgrading Bailey to mostly a friend, also my lawyer. Dr. Patel came by a little later and told me that I was a very lucky man. Seriously, is it a requirement for doctors? Do they ever tell a patient that they're unlucky as she? I'd sprained my wrist on LaValliere's jaw, but other than that and a wrenched shoulder, my limbs were all intact. I'd gotten some hard hits to the face and a minor concussion. It took 10 stitches to sew up my cheek, but nothing was broken. Patel said that the scar would give me a little character. He was a disturbingly cheery guy. Below the neck, I had 3 broken ribs, one of which had punctured my lung. They'd inserted a chest tube, and the lung had reinflated. My ribcage was wrapped up like a mummy, and Dr. Patel predicted that I'd have to stay in the hospital for a couple more days. That, at least, was good news. The last thing in the world that I wanted to do was go home to my blushing bride. After the doc left, I was still wide awake, so I checked all the social networks. Jane's Facebook page had a clip of Linda and LaValliere dancing. She hadn't named names, but Mrs. Witherspoon, a widow who lived in our neighborhood, had tagged Linda and me. Duck. I didn't bother to read the rest of the comments. I felt bad enough already. Searching Morrison's and blood on YouTube, I found a couple of videos of me coughing on D. One of them, titled Drunk Guy Puking Blood, even showed me getting clipped by the doorman. Someone had put up a little footage of me getting scraped off the sidewalk by the paramedics. Morrison's, LaValliere, and Cluck brought up videos of LaValliere and Linda dancing, and a couple of me looking like a volcano waiting to erupt. One of them, posted by Mizuz, was titled, My Boy is a Bull. It showed the whole setup. LaValliere approaching the table, taking Linda, and leaving me with my jaw hanging open. Through it all, Mizuz kept up a running commentary as he cut from Linda and LaValliere to me. LaValliere's hands on Linda's behind. My unblinking glare. Fingers clutching a steak knife. What you gonna do with that knife, boy? Little man's getting some balls, maybe. Linda pressing herself to LaValliere. Fury. Is the little man gonna cry? Laughter. I watched it through to the end. Watched the play of expressions across my face: confusion, disbelief, anger, pain, rage. I bookmarked everything, then played the video of me spitting on D a couple more times. It hurt to laugh, but it still made me feel a little better. After that, I was pretty worn out. I curled up into the pillows. Bailey walked in with 2 cups of coffee. From the nurse's lounge, he said as he passed one to me. Bailey, you old son of a witch. I laughed. You've been here for 5 minutes and you've already charmed the staff. I took a sip and almost spat it out. Damn, you call this mud coffee? He chuckled. It does the job, JC. Now tell me what happened. After I filled him in, Bailey looked grim. I've heard stories like this before, he said. Believe it or not, you got off lucky. You and Dr. Patel should take your show on the road, I grunted. I'm not feeling too lucky at the moment. There's a lot you don't know, JC. There have been some rumors on the street about LaValliere and his gang. It seems our illustrious tight end has hooked himself up with some pretty bad players. In the off-season, he's been pimping himself and his teammates out to some sort of cuckold ring. They seduce married women, then blackmailed their husbands. If they got to Linda, we figure they've already turned some other wives in your group. Hell, man, Morrison's is their hunting ground. I thought about it. It was all coming together. How has this not gotten out in the news? If I'd known. Everyone's in on it, JC. The editor of the Buffalo News, the mayor, the chief of police, the referees, the NFL commissioner. They're all being blackmailed. They even killed a guy. Official reports say it was suicide, but dude who shoots himself in the back of the head, then harvests his own heart, kidneys, liver and lungs. Black market organ harvesting. I exclaimed. How? That's just the tip of the iceberg. Blackmail, extortion, human trafficking, suicide capsules, and at least one playoff game that was probably fixed. That'll get them more than a 5-yard penalty, I growled. What can we do? Well, there's this camp out west. I can send you there to be safe. When I woke up, I was muttering something about not wanting a steak. It took me a minute to realize that I was still in the hospital, that Linda, for all her cruelty, was probably not an assassin sent to put me in a clock cage, and that I was craving a cup of coffee. By the time Bailey and my parents got to the hospital, the nightmare had faded and I was feeling a lot better. I waited until everyone was there. I only wanted to tell the story once. Mom and Dad had a hard time believing me, but the social media didn't leave much room for doubt. For that matter, neither did my medical chart. Say what you want about hospitals, but they do a great job of resolving the question of whether or not someone has kicked the shit out of you. It's too bad we don't have any footage of them beating you up, JC, Bailey said. Sorry for not filming it, man. I coughed. Maybe if I'd had a little more advance notice. Dad gave me a rueful smile, but Mom looked pretty shaken. I remembered the blinking red light in the back hallway. Hey, is there any way we could get security footage from inside the club? Not without a court order, Bailey said. But if we can make a case that there was a crime committed. Well, I sure as shit didn't do this to myself, I said. You know, the cops came by earlier, but I was still out. Can I file a police report? It'll get my allegations about LaValliere, Mezuz and Smith on the record. It's a good place to start, he said. I'll give them a call. If you're up to it, we can talk to them tomorrow. That works. And, you know, if we need evidence, there's always my face. I'm pretty sure LaValliere's bare knuckles didn't tear open my cheek. He was probably wearing a ring. Like maybe a Super Bowl ring. Bailey mused. LaValliere's got one. He was with Kansas City before he got traded. That could be something. That's what I was thinking. I remembered my dream. What if there was a conspiracy, Bailey? He gave me a funny look. Look, I'd bet anything this wasn't the only time LaValliere has done this. First, you've got him signaling to the bandleader. Second, Mezuz had his camera on me even before LaValliere came to the table, which suggests that he knew what was going down. Third, there's how well they knew the place. How did LaValliere know about the back exit? How did he know to grab Linda coming out of the bathroom? Why were the other football players back there? Shit, man, if I hadn't been watching from the bar, they would have gotten away clean. So you're figuring what? LaValliere goes to this place regularly, snags some poor bastard's wife. He saw my expression. Sorry, dude. Anyway, he snags some wife, slips out the back, and takes her home. More or less. If the husband catches them, like I did, he gets roughed up. Meanwhile, the club gets the prestige of having famous football players hang out there. Bailey smirked. Famous. Let's not get crazy, JC. It's the Bills. I smiled back. Okay, smartest, regionally famous. Anyway, LaValliere tips the band leader to rustle up some slow songs to aid the seduction along, and keeps his teammates close, in case things get out of hand. He looked thoughtful. It's an interesting theory, but how do you prove it? If he's done this before, he's probably left a trail of videos like the ones from last night, not to mention a lot of pissed off husbands who'd be interested in telling their stories. I'll check social media, maybe send out some messages. See what I can find. I leaned back into my pillows. My head was swirling with unanswered questions and possible leads, but I needed to focus on the most important thing. Linda. While we're looking into all this stuff, could you see about getting me a divorce lawyer? Maybe someone in your firm. Divorce. My mother gasped. Jim, that's so fast. Are you sure? I looked at my dad. His eyes were sad, but he gave me a little nod. Mom, she cheated on me. Left me humiliated in a public place. Turned her back on me when I got in a fight trying to defend our marriage. At this point, I don't feel safe living in the same house as her. My mom's face went white. Jim, you don't think she'd hurt me? Let someone rough me up so she could get away. I closed my eyes. Took a deep breath. Mom, I don't think. I know. I can't trust her. After that, there wasn't really much to say. I did my research and Bailey did his, and when we met with the police on Sunday afternoon, we had the bare bones of a case. They were skeptical about my story, but when I showed them the videos from Friday night, they perked up. After I showed them a string of videos of LaValliere and Morrison stretching back over 6 months, their smirks disappeared. I guess that, in combination with my medical chart, the story started to make sense to them, too. Later, my parents brought the kids by to see me, and we had a great time curled up in my hospital bed, watching Frozen on Emma's iPad. Given Mom's reaction to my divorce announcement, I expected her to lobby for reconciliation, but she surprised me. On Sunday, Dad said, she read Linda the riot act. I never found out what she said, but it was clear that Linda wasn't coming to the hospital anytime soon. While I was watching Frozen with the kids, I dreamed up some great revenge scenarios, but that's all they were daydreams. I can't fight, I can't maim, I don't have the money to have LaValliere killed, and I wasn't going to send the mother of my children to a Mexican whorehouse. At the end of the day, I had a good lawyer, a moderately healthy bank account, a growing business, and the ability to tell stories. Good stories. Persuasive stories. I started thinking about the narrative. The public story. Given my line of work, I'm surprised it took me that long. I blame the concussion. Jane's posts had gotten a couple hundred comments, ranging from people berating me for being a wimp to people berating Linda for being a cheater. About what I'd expected. I created my own post, which I linked to it. Dear friends, family and neighbors. As you might have heard, on Friday night, my wife Linda cheated on me. You may have seen the videos of her dancing with Marc LaValliere, our city's illustrious tight end. But those videos don't tell the whole story, and I think you deserve to know everything that happened. I laid out my story and linked to all the videos I'd compiled. I tagged everyone involved, including Mizzou's, Smith, LaValliere, Morrison's, and the people sitting at our table. I even found the Facebook page for the band that was playing that night and got them into the mix. Finally, I put in a conclusion. So there you have it. My wife cheated on me with one of the city's best-known sports stars. When I objected, he and his teammates sent me to the hospital. As far as I can tell, this was done with the consent and in some cases, the active support of our friends, the club we attended, and even Morrison's house band. I pride myself on being someone who takes care of his family, but when you're faced with the Bills' offensive line, a table full of traitorous friends, and a wife who's decided that a night of fun is worth more than her marriage, well, there isn't much you can do, really. I have already submitted a police report detailing the events of that night, and will begin divorce proceedings against Linda as soon as possible. In the meantime, I hope that all of you will take this opportunity to think about what each of us owe each other. Think about loyalty. Think about love. Think about friendship. And, while you're at it, think twice before going to Morrison's on a Friday night. Bailey thought that it was a little preachy and probably nosed up against the edge of online harassment. Then a random Gen Z kid, who just happened to have a grandfather at Timber Ridge and just happened to love ziplining, did a dramatic reading of my post on the Clock app, and the whole thing went viral. Needless to say, Bailey became apoplectic. Thankfully, the district attorney was less concerned about online harassment than physical assault, and she secured a court order requiring Morrison's to surrender his footage from February 29th. At first, the club's management balked, claiming that their security cameras weren't working that night, but when the DA expanded the court order to 12 other nights that LaValliere had been caught on video dancing with someone else's wife, I guess they decided that the jig was up. The DA also required LaValliere to submit his Super Bowl ring for forensic testing, which brought the whole thing to the attention of the Bills' front office. He, Mizuz and Smith were suspended. It didn't mean much, since the season was over, but it's the thought that counts. Meanwhile, Bailey got me a divorce lawyer. Dolores Cartwright was no nonsense, straightforward, and thankfully willing to make house calls to a hospital. In the absence of any real evidence of adultery, we went with the irretrievable breakdown. I asked for primary custody, the house, and full control of my business. In return, I offered all of our shared savings, and agreed to take full responsibility for the mortgage, with the proviso that we'd split the equity when Tommy went to college. Based on the standard calculations, child support and alimony were pretty much a wash. It was a generous offer, particularly as I wasn't pushing the DA to charge Linda as an accessory to my assault. Still, according to the terms, Linda would have to move out once I was fully recovered and able to take care of the kids. We agreed that, if she pushed back, we'd refile under cruel and inhuman treatment. Even if that didn't get a sign-off from the judge, it would definitely scar her standing in the community. Under Dolores's guidance, I closed our joint credit cards, took Linda off my insurance, and did all the other little things you do when you decide to separate from your spouse. Linda and I had always kept separate bank accounts, at her insistence, so splitting our finances was pretty easy. While I was setting all the legal things in motion, Linda was doing some damage control of her own. When Mom barred her from visiting me in the hospital, she proceeded to complain to anyone who'd listen about how I was doing her wrong. She also responded to my post, claiming that she didn't know what happened after she turned her back on me in the parking lot, and reasserting her right to enjoy the opportunity that fell into her lap that night. I, obviously, disagreed, as did almost everyone who commented on her post. I had a lot of fun reading the reactions, although it still hurt to laugh. After a couple of days in the hospital, Dr. Patel told me that, since the morgue didn't want me, he was going to let me go out the front door. I faked a chuckle and told him not to quit his day job. I stayed with my parents while I recovered. Mom and Dad ferried the kids back and forth a couple of times, which gave me a chance to keep up with them. And watch Frozen a few more times. I'm not sure whether that helped my recovery or not, but having Emma and Tommy around definitely raised my spirits. Lying in my old bed in Mom and Dad's house, I had a lot of time to think over my relationship with Linda. I realized that I'd spent the last few years in a sort of self-imposed fog. Between the kids, my job, politics, the weather, and so many other things, I had chosen to overlook Linda's anti-male comments, her bouts of condescension, her need for control, and a host of other little warning signs. I had dismissed them as aberrations, when they were actually a very real part of who she was. The person I thought she was could never have done what she did to me. Ergo, the person that I thought she was, well, that wasn't the real Linda. After a week, I was feeling a lot better. It would take a while for the bruises to fade, the scars to heal, and the splint to come off my hand, but I was able to walk around, dress myself, and almost breathe normally. By then, Linda had received my petition for divorce. Bailey hadn't heard back from her yet, but my parents had. She wanted to talk. I sent her a text setting up a meeting at my parents' place. When she walked in wearing a blue dress, I had a moment of deja vu. I remembered the last time we were together, she in a blue dress, me in a suit, walking into Morrison's. I thought about how one night it illuminated so much of our relationship and, in the clear light of day, how the relationship I thought we had evaporated. Still, even when feelings are gone and hearts are broken, manners still survive. Linda, I said. You look good. Linda gave me a shy smile. You too, Jim. The lie almost sounded sincere. Her eyes scanned the stitches on my cheek, my black eyes, the splint on my hand, and she looked away. Thank you for meeting with me. I shrugged. It needed to happen. We have 2 kids together. We need to be able to get along for them, if nothing else. I imagined Atticus Finch, Perry Mason, Longfellow deeds. People who had the words, the eloquence, the righteousness, to face this moment and prevail. Nope. It had to be me. My words. And the usual script wasn't going to cut it. What do you see happening here, Linda? What are you looking to get out of this little conversation? Linda paused for a second. I wasn't saying the line she wanted to hear. Jim, if I known I'd hurt you, I never. Stop. I snapped. She jerked, as if I'd slapped her. Stop with it didn't mean anything, it was just one night, it was only sex. Just stop. And while we're at it, let's just skip the next part though. If you just let me have this night, if you hadn't followed me out, it's your own damned fault you got hurt. Let's just skip right ahead to the end. What's your end game? What do you want? Linda wasn't used to seeing this side of me. She blinked. I want you to come home, she said softly. Carefully. I want you to be with your children. You can stop that too. You don't get to play the children card or the loving wife card. While I was fighting for our family on Friday night, you were running away with the big strong jock and blowing him in the car. Her eyes went wide. Didn't think I saw that, did you? Congratulations, Linda. You got what you wanted. You bagged the football player, and now you can brag about it to Dee and the girls. But you don't get to hide behind the kids just because you found out that the price of your big night is higher than you expected. Then I said the words that I knew would really gut her. Besides, the question isn't whether or not I'm coming back home. I am. The question is whether or not you'll stay there. Jim. Of course I'll stay there. Her eyes narrowed. And if you try to take the kids away from me, you'll lose. The wife always gets the kids. Everybody knows that. No, sweetie, the primary caregiver gets the kids. The one who makes the lunches, gets the kids to school and picks them up. Goes to doctor's appointments and parent-teacher conferences. Which one of us do you think that is? She flushed with anger. I take care of our family. We do it together. We're equals. She had a look of triumph, like she found the secret phrase that would make everything better. Equals. The trouble was, our night at Morrison's had sucked all the magic out of that word. I sighed. You've always said that we're equals. Partners. But that's not what you really believe, is it? I've spent years listening to your snotty comments about little boys who are led around by their decks, or are slaves to toxic masculinity, or have the emotional depth of a cocker spaniel. And you always finish up with something like, but not you, honey. You're different. You're special. But you don't really believe that, do you? You believe that you'll use the kids as leverage to get your simple, somewhat dim husband to come home, then you'll lead him around by the deck until everything blows over. I'm sorry to break it to you, Linda, but a steak and a blue job aren't going to fix this one. She tried to look smug, but couldn't quite pull it off. Get real, Jim. You're going to give up everything, your kids, your family, our sex life over one night. I snorted. That's the thing, Linda, I never really had you, did I? Friday night proved that. And sex, I paused. Did I really want to go there? Then I saw the little smirk playing around the edges of her mouth, the one that told me that, after Mark, I was always going to be second best. That she was the alpha who could bag the football star and I was the beta who was lucky to bag her. Duck it, why not? Well, sex isn't quite the big selling point you think it is. Her mouth fell open. I'm sorry, Linda, but you're not the best sex I've ever had. To be honest, you don't even crack the top 5. But you, she sputtered. Here's a little secret, Linda, the best sex is free. It's undignified. It's sloppy and messy and silly. It's not a power struggle or a fight for dominance or politically correct negotiation. In bed, with me at least, you have so many barriers and walls and rules that I wonder if you've ever been able to really let go. I shrugged. I'm guessing that you may have loosened up for Marky Boy, but I'd still be surprised if you cracked his top 100. If I had to put money on it, I'd bet the most exciting thing for him that night was taking you away from me. My guess is that there's some daddy issues and suppressed homosexuality going on there, but that's between him and his therapist. What? No. He chose me. I was the most beautiful woman there. Do yourself a favor. Search LaValliere and Morrison's on YouTube. Marky's big hobby is going to Morrison's on Friday nights and taking women away from their husbands. You weren't some grand conquest. At best, you were Friday night's stir prize. The weekly trophy he gets for being the biggest, strongest jock in the house. I'm not a trophy. She was red-faced, furious. That's incredibly insulting. I chuckled. You're right, it is. But let's make it clear. I'm not the one who made that case. You are. Before that night, I never would have said that you're some sort of mindless prize to be passed from man to man. I shrugged. But you proved me wrong. You showed me that you wouldn't hesitate to sell out our marriage and our family and even yourself for bragging rights and some freaky little Cinderella fantasy with a second-rate celebrity. Ducky Jim. He was the trophy. He was the best man in that room and I got him. You should be proud of that. Proud of your wife, who's hot enough to bag the sexiest guy in the club. But your ego can't handle it. I wondered if she could hear the words coming out of her mouth. If she realized that, with every syllable, she was throwing another spade of dirt on the coffin of her marriage. I knew that I wasn't going to be able to reach her, but something, maybe our time together, or the love I still felt for her, compelled me to try. The toxic male ego, huh? I was waiting for this one. Is this where you start talking about how pathetic it is when a man relies on strength and aggression to get what he wants? How weak we are. I smiled grimly. And to prove that point, you did what? Turn your back on a man who has spent 10 years taking care of our family. Latched onto a muscle-bound pretty boy who did everything but drag you home by the hair. He didn't. I put up a hand. How many times have we talked about how despicable it is when men use violence and aggression to seize what they want without the consent of those around them? But that's exactly what Marc LaValliere did on Friday. And you, a woman who preaches equality and claims to prize commitment, you turned your back on your faithful husband and used toxic femininity to get what you wanted. Toxic femininity. She sputtered. That's not even a thing. Sure it is, Linda. What would you call it when a woman uses her body to seduce a random guy, even at the cost of her family? When she publicly humiliates the man she claims to love, hides behind the children when it benefits her, but ignores them when they get in the way of her bagging a random stud. If that's not toxic, what is? It's not about toxicity. It's about choice. She straightened. This was firm ground. It's about freedom. My body, my choice. Linda, let's ignore the fact that you're taking a slogan that was coined to support a woman's right to choose an abortion, and using it to justify ducking an asshole who drives an Escalade. Let's just ignore that for a second. You claim that you have the right to pick up a guy in a bar, go home with him and screw his brains out, regardless of my desires. Is that more or less your position? Yeah, but let me finish. You talk about choices. Well, you also chose to get married to me. To build a life. To have babies together. When you made those choices, you weren't drugged. I wasn't twisting your arm. Right. Fine. Yes. She glared at me. Linda, those choices, to duck a trophy clock and to have a family with me, can't coexist. You have to choose one or the other. For most of our marriage, you picked our children and me. At Morrison's, you picked the strange clock. And, because you changed your choice, I'm changing mine. You have no right. I slapped the table. I have every right. I glared at her. I have a right to say my body, my choice too. I have a right to choose a woman who will stand beside me to defend our marriage. Who will walk away from sex with a handsome stranger in favor of a life she claims to cherish. Someone who shares my values and has a shred of integrity. Duck you and your integrity. Her face was looking purplish, and I wondered if she was about to stroke out. You don't have the balls to deal with this, so you're running away like a hurt little boy. And you're hiding your behavior behind your children and some vague idea of being a free-spirited, independent woman of the world. Let's be clear here. You claim that women are the equal of men and, for the record, I agree. But if that's true, they also bear an equal level of responsibility. Have you ever heard the phrase, with great power comes great responsibility? What is that, some Obama quote? She rolled her eyes. Nope, it's from Spider-Man. Linda sneered, and I smiled back. Granted, Stan Lee's not a feminist theorist or renowned social critic, but he's relevant here. You demand equal power in our relationship, but you refuse to take on equal responsibility. You want to be a big, strong woman making her mark in the world, but when it suits your purposes, you're happy to hide behind the prejudice that a woman is automatically a better parent, just because she has a uterus. You want society to ignore your body in the boardroom, but you're more than willing to traffic on it in a club or the bedroom or the courtroom. You want the great power accorded to an equal partner, but you don't have the guts to take on the great responsibility of dealing with that power honestly. That's bullshit. I just refuse to let a man define me. You're not my master. You're not my warden. Enough. I snapped. You think you're a radical, but at the end of the day, you're just another woman who got wet watching two boys fight over her and spread her legs for the winner. Nothing could be more basic. More boringly traditional. I sneered at her. Here's a clue, Linda, feeding an itchy kitty at the expense of your committed relationship doesn't make you a radical rebel. It doesn't make you Che Guevara. It doesn't even make you Gloria Steinem. It makes you a shitty wife, a shitty mother, a shitty human being, and a shitty ducking feminist. To be honest, it went downhill from there. Epilogue. A couple of days later, I moved home into the guest room, of course. While I would have preferred to avoid Linda completely, her work still required her to come in from 9 to 5, and she was leaning hard on Mrs. Porter, who was still pissed at her, to handle the kids in the mornings and afternoons. Emma and Tommy were suffering, and it was time for me to step up. Once I was back home, I quickly resumed my old routine of juggling work and childcare. As for Linda and I, we managed to avoid fighting in front of the kids mostly by completely avoiding each other. I consider that a win. Meanwhile, my various legal proceedings continued their slow march forward. It turned out that I had, indeed, left some DNA on LaValliere's ring. That, combined with the security cam footage from Morrison's parking lot and back hallway, firmly established that LaValliere, Mezuz and Smith had cleaned my clock. They lawyered up and managed to plead down to misdemeanor third-degree assault, which carried a small fine. On the bright side, they also had to pay my hospital bill. And, by the time the next season rolled around, LaValliere had been traded. I hear Detroit's even colder than Buffalo. The assault conviction came in handy when 10 of LaValliere's victims, including me, filed a class action lawsuit for intentional infliction of emotional distress. Mezuz had dutifully recorded LaValliere's nights at Morrison's, and his videos, complete with commentary, ended up getting played in court. The plaintiffs all walked away with 7-figure settlements. In my case, it was the low 7 figures after Bailey took his cut. He also took a chunk of the 6-figure settlement we got from Morrison's for their complicity that night. Needless to say, the video of the bouncer's little love tap came in handy. I'm still trying to figure out where Bailey falls on the lawyer-friend spectrum. Linda hired a lawyer, who, I assume, took one look at the whole mess, and advised her to sign the papers. She eventually gave in, and we set about the process of learning to co-parent. Our conversation at my parents' house made it clear that we were both carrying a lot of baggage, and it was affecting how we acted around the children, so we started seeing a counselor to help us build a less toxic relationship. It took a lot of time and a lot of screaming, but we found a way to relate to each other with civility, if not warmth. We put the kids in therapy, too, but children Emma and Tommy's age tend to be pretty resilient, and we eventually got to a place where we all could be in a room together without the monsters from the past rearing their ugly heads. I never saw any of the other couples after that night. I heard rumors that Dee and Dave had split and Jane and Phil were having problems, but I never bothered to follow up. To be honest, I don't really care. And so, a year later, I found myself minus a wife, but plus a fat bank account chock full of Marc LaValliere's money, most of which I poured back into my business. I was still the primary caregiver to my kids, and miracle of miracles, they had moved on from Frozen. They were now completely enthralled by Wall-E. It's a good movie. I give it 6 months before I learn to hate it. Life has gotten a lot better. While I'm still working through some things from that night, I'm also building up a new group of friends. I can imagine a time in the not too distant future when I'll be ready to date again, at least on the nights when Linda has the kids. But not all the scars have healed. I still hate watching the Bills, and have become the only Dolphins fan in my neighborhood. The prejudice is real. And that's it for today's story, friends. If you enjoyed today's story, leave a like and comment before you leave. Don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification button so you don't miss any video. Goodbye for now, and I'll see you in the next video.